In tutorial 11, we were introduced to createAsyncThunk to build super action creator methods called thunks to handle asynchronous CRUD operations. We learned to build cases in the extraReducers for each stage of the lifecycle actions. We used MockAPI to build a RESTful API endpoint to test our CRUD operations. In this tutorial, we'll continue to build on what we learned about createAsyncThunks and build a thunk for reading or fetching posts. The process is similar to building this createPostThunk, except that we will be using the get method instead of the post method to retrieve all posts from the API call. We've already imported the createAsyncThunk middleware at the top. So let's go down and we're going to build our next thunk here below the createPostThunk. I covered the details of creating a thunk in tutorial 11, so please check out that card above if you want to review that tutorial. Here, we're just going to copy this createPostThunk, and right below it, we're going to paste, and we're going to adjust the name and other details for our new fetchPostThunk. And here, we're going to change the name to fetchPostThunk, and the action type is going to be fetchPostThunk. And so we remember that this first parameter is an action type, and it associates the lifecycle action with the thunk. And we're going to build the lifecycles in a bit. And the second parameter is an async function, which is where all the asynchronous logic resides. And in the async function, we're not going to pass an argument because we want all the posts. And that will change later when we update or delete a specific post. But we want to keep the rejectWithValue function for error handling, but it needs to be the second parameter. So instead of just removing the first parameter, we need to include an unused placeholder so that this rejectWithValue is in the second parameter position. And here we're using Axios, and we're passing the get method, and we're passing the posts URL, which is our mock API, to get data from the external API. And in this case, we're not passing an arg, so we can get rid of that second parameter. And once the promise resolves, we'll receive the response from the server, and we have that saved in a variable. And it will contain metadata like status, header, as well as the actual data. And Axios parses or converts that data into a JSON object, and that will allow us to use the data on the front end. And now that we've set up the thunk here, let's import it on the front end. So let's save this, and we'll do that in our home component. So let's open that up. And it makes sense to place it here because it's the place where our posts are going to show up. And then we're going to pass it to the post list. So this is going to change slightly. So we're going to import fetchPostThunk from the post slice. And we're going to use it here in the application. And we want to get our post from the database server when the application loads. And we need another hook called useEffect, because useEffect allows us to perform side effects like communicating with the database server in order to get posts when the application loads. So let's import that. useEffect is part of Redux. So we're going to import it here. And like I said, we need useEffect in order to perform the side effect of communicating with the database. So it's going to automatically import, which is great. And here's the setup for the useEffect. useEffect has two parameters. The first parameter is a callback function that contains the code that will run after the application loads. And in our case, that is going to be to dispatch the fetchPostThunk. So let's type that in. We wanted to dispatch the fetchPostThunk. When fetchPostThunk is called, it dispatches the fetchPostThunk action, which is an object that includes type pending, fulfilled, and rejected. And it automatically returns a fetchPostThunk action, which is an object that includes the type. The types are pending, fulfilled, and rejected. And if these types sound familiar, It's because these are life cycle stages, and we're going to work on these shortly when we build our cases in the extra reducers. Now, continuing with useEffect, there's a second parameter, which is an array, an optional dependency array, which controls when certain logic should rerun, ensuring that we're fetching or refetching data only when it's necessary. If it's empty, the effect runs only once after the initial render or when the application initially reloads. So at this point, you may be asking yourself why we need to use the fetchPostThunk to fetch from an endpoint when we're already using useSelector to get posts that we previously created from the Redux store. Well, the brief answer is that we need them both. Well, let me explain with an example. Imagine we're building a new project that has existing posts stored in an external API or database, but moving forward, we need to create new posts. So first, calling fetchPostThunk inside useEffect ensures that we receive the complete data set from the database, including existing posts when the application loads initially. So fetchPost gets older posts from the database and updates the Redux store with those posts. And second, once the Redux store is populated with those existing posts, useSelector provides access to the existing post on the front end, but it also ensures that the front end stays up to date with any new changes, whether you're creating, updating, or deleting posts. And here's the important key to remember. Once the initial fetch is completed, the app doesn't need to reload the entire data set again. Instead, useSelector gives us access to the current state of the Redux store, and the UI updates dynamically when new posts are created, updated, or deleted. So only part of the UI needs to re-render, keeping the application efficient. This data flow prevents unnecessary refetching or reloading of the application by separating initial data loading from fetchPostThunk from UI updates using useSelector. And here's another question about efficiency and performance. Should we add here posts so that the application updates whenever there are any updates to the post? Well, unless it's absolutely necessary to perform a specific action, such as a recalculation, in general, we should avoid using the dependency in useEffect since it causes unnecessary refetching or reloading. Remember, useSelector gives us access to the current state of the Redux store, so we can remove this post. Okay, so now that we have the useEffect and code for fetching, let's move on to the extra reducers here in the post slice, where we will handle the lifecycle stages and responses. Now, we've already reviewed how life cycles work, so we're going to move rather quickly through these steps. If you want to see a more detailed explanation, please check out the card above for tutorial 11. So again, we're going to just copy these and let's make a little separation. We're going to call this createAsyncThunk, and here we're going to call this one fetchThunk. And we're going to paste here, move this over, and we're going to rename this fetchPostThunk, fetchPostThunk, and fetchPostThunk. And let's save that. Save all. So what changes are we going to make here? So when we make the request and it's pending, then we're going to send a status to the Redux store. So here when we make a request to the API, initially it's pending, so we send a response of status to the Redux store. And in the second life cycle, if our attempt to get data is successful, we're going to send a succeeded status to the Redux store. Instead of pushing data to the Redux store, we're going to replace the data in the Redux store. So that's different from creating, where we're creating a new post and we're simply pushing that single post to an existing array of posts in the Redux store. Whereas here, we're going to replace, that's why we're assigning the action payload to the state entries, because we want the most recent information in the Redux store. And if we're fetching all the data, then we want to replace what's in the Redux store. And finally, the rejected is the same. If our efforts to fetch data are unsuccessful, we want to send a status of failed to the Redux door. And here we want to send a custom error message using the action payload. So when we get or fetch posts from the database server, we want to replace the existing state with the latest data from the database server. And this approach ensures that the Redux state always reflects the most up-to-date data from the server. So let's save this and let's see if it's working. Okay, so let's go back over to uncaught reference. Dispatch is not defined. And let's go back over to the home, and we did useEffect, but we forgot to define it and initialize it. So we got use dispatch. We initialize it, and we need to define it here. Well, let's see if that works now. Okay, so that error is fixed. Let's you can see our post showing up on the front end. This is a good sign. It means that the fetchPostThunk is working with useEffect. We're seeing our post from the server when the application loads. So I think this is a good place to end our lesson. In the next tutorial, we're going to work on our next thunk, which is update post thunk. If you found value in this tutorial so far, don't forget to like and share this video. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell button. If you want to be the first to know, connect to the Hub, Source Coder Hub's community. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.